In this final section of this chapter, I want to discuss a very specific technique that I want you to employ going forward, and that is establishing a compositional workflow. And we've talked a lot in this course about what makes an image successful, what makes a composition successful. And we've talked about simplicity, asymmetry, eye lines, and point of view. Now what I want to do is discuss having you establish a consistent workflow or a way of using these particular compositional tools and techniques to create your compositions. Now, you may not always do everything in exactly the same order that I do. Let me show you and discuss my workflow with you, and then you can start with that and develop your own. But regardless of what specific workflow you use, I really encourage you to start with simplicity because everything else, as we've discussed, flows from there. And when you look at the simplicity of an image, don't just think, oh, I want to make it simple. Really hone in on the 4 subsections of simplicity and start with the number of image elements. It should be less than 4. Can you ever violate that? Sure, but rarely. So it's make sure there's less than 4. And then look at the internal complexity. Remember in this image, we only had 2 components. In the internal complexity, there was lots of detail, but everything was visible. And that's the difference between complexity and just detail. And then make sure all of your elements are separated. And then make sure that you have a primary visual element. Sometimes in compositions, particularly if you're shooting in bright daylight for landscapes, one compositional element may not stick out as much as you like, so you may have to do some work on that after you capture your image. But I really want to encourage you to start with this, because if your image fails the simplicity test, there's no sense going on, because all the asymmetry and eye lines and point of views in the world are not going to help a too complex image. So always start with asymmetry. And then after that, if my compositions pass the simplicity test, then I typically move to asymmetry. I look at vertical and horizontal asymmetry, and then I compare the 4 quadrants. It's a real quick and easy way for me to establish the asymmetry in my image. Then, you may use the rule of thirds to fine-tune the location. We talked about, placing key elements in the image. All of this is part of doing asymmetry. And, often simultaneously, I'm actually doing eye lines as well. Because remember, as we've discussed, asymmetry actually helps develop eye lines. So I look for physical eye lines, such as this beautiful eye line of Turnagain Arm up in Alaska. And I look for perspective, foreground, middle ground, background. I look for any tonal or color transitions. Any element that helps move the eye across the image, I focus in on fine-tuning my composition. And again, asymmetry and eye lines are often used together. And then finally, point of view. I want to make sure that I'm getting the best point of view that I possibly can to grab someone's eye who's going to be looking at my image. Think about changes in scale from large to small, positions high to low, unusual views, unexpected views. And really, in point of fact and practice, sometimes the point of view of a scene pops into my mind first. So I think about that first, and maybe I position my camera low like I did here. But then I always go back to and step through my compositional workflow, starting with simplicity, all 4 of the elements, then asymmetry and eye lines. And if I can't get a composition that passes the simplicity test, I'm just not going to use it. So establish a workflow and use it consistently. And if you do that, you're going to end up with not only a consistent workflow, but consistent images with good compositional elements.